you don't have a large margin for error against this football team. So when you settle for 3 points as many times as the Eagles did settle for 3 points, that ends up shooting you in the foot because you didn't convert those points for the most amount of points you could have gotten on that possession. You had to make them pay for every single mistake.
Yeah. The makeshift offensive line was a surprising positive for the most part. I was, I guess, reasonably happy to see that they held their own. Like, I like the pace that they kept up that helped Jalen Hurts out a lot. So.
Welcome back to the live post-game show, 6abc.com, as well as the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. Don't forget, this is brought to you by, once again, First Trust Bank. You can check out the JAKIB Media YouTube channel tomorrow morning for Birds 365 with Jody Mack and Johnny Mack. First Trust Bank, the official bank of the Philadelphia Eagles. As we were saying going into break, we were talking about the Eagles' defense. 471 yards they allowed on 63 plays by the Kansas City Chiefs. Eagles offense were able to amass, again, with those 3 backup offensive linemen, which is just insane to me, 461 yards, so only a difference of 10 yards in that category. Defensively speaking, when we look back at this game, as we are doing right now, and as we'll continue to look at it when we watch the film later in the week to help us give a better understanding, when we see what Nick Sirianni has to say about it as well, the star of the show was supposed to be the defensive line. The star of the show was supposed to be a guy that you've mentioned many times already, Derek Gunn. It was supposed to be Fletcher Cox. I still have yet to see someone step up and even come close to filling the void left behind by Brandon Graham. I know Josh Sweat had a sack in the game that was negated because of a penalty downfield, so that's something that Eagles really couldn't do much about, except for maybe not make those same dumb, boneheaded penalties again. But I still have yet to see somebody come in, and especially when you're having so much success against an Eagles team, running the football, especially between the tackles and when they try to bump it outside, I still haven't seen anybody step up and set that edge. The only time I hear a defensive end's name being mentioned is when it's a penalty, when it's Derek Barnett, when I see somebody get beat on the outside. That is a void they're going to be trying to fill, quote unquote, by committee for the rest of the season. And I'll just say this, it's not off to a great start trying to fill in with that committee right now. I went into the Monday night game hoping to see that committee step up. I didn't see it. I look at this game, try to step up and make those big plays against a potent Kansas City offense. Still, again, came up empty.
Well, I have a question for you, Derek. I know you know Brandon Graham. What do you think was going through his mind as he watched this game and he watched this defense today? What do you think his message to them is after this?
He's screaming. I know he's screaming. I know he's seeing things that we don't see. Players who play the game at this level see a lot of different things that we overlook and just don't see. I guarantee you he's screaming. And I'm sure he's trying his best to help coach up the likes of Josh Sweat and Derek Barnett and help them. But it's just not working right now. See, since the NFL has gone to more of the smaller speed rushers on the outside, you have to give up something in a lot of ways in terms of those speed rushers being able to stand their ground and defend effectively against the run. Those guys are being paid now to get after the quarterback. And in this high-powered passing a league that we've been watching for the last decade or so. So it's very seldom that you have an edge rusher who's a great combination of setting the edge to defend against the run, as well as getting up the field to get after a quarterback. But if you look at the better teams, what they do have is a collection of linebackers who can cover for some of the deficiencies they may have up front. And in this case, everything about this Eagles defense is being exposed. The edge guys are not getting home with enough frequency. The linebackers are not good enough to come up and fill a support. And so now it is what it is. The only thing you can hope for, if this trend continues, the only thing you can hope for is if this defense can generate turnovers. They don't have the luxury of having an offense yet like a Kansas City that can score at will. Now, you look at the 2 games Kansas City lost, it's because the teams they played made necessary stops, just enough necessary stops to get the ball back in their offense's hands. Baltimore offense is a high-powered offense. The Chargers offense is a high-powered offense. And those teams made just enough stops to get the ball back in their hands and do enough damage to get the wins. This Eagles offense is not there yet. Now Baltimore and the Chargers have better defenses than the Eagles, but also they haven't been playing great. They play great in spurts. They've gotten turnovers in spurts. This team barely has 2 turnovers now through 4 games. They barely got their first interception of the season in today's game. They were one of 4 teams going into this game that did not have an interception. Last week, they were one of 2 teams that didn't have any turnovers whatsoever on defense. So the turnovers that Jonathan Gannon talked about all in training camp, that we're all about trying to get turnovers, it hasn't happened for this unit yet. And you don't know when it's going to happen. And right now, you can't rely on this defense to get you much of anything. In a lot of cases, the good offenses playing against an Eagles defense right now is an offense that will hurt itself more so than the Eagles hurting them.
Mm-hmm. No, that I'll absolutely agree with. Plus, the Eagles, one of the great things was when they did get that interception over the middle, I was thinking, this might be that moment, because the other thing that really hurt the Kansas City Chiefs against Baltimore and also last week was the fact that they weren't able to move the ball because of those turnovers. Sure, their defense got stops against the Chargers also, but they also turned the football over at a crucial time. I was thinking maybe that interception by Wilson, I believe it was, in the game. When he had that interception, I thought, okay, this might be it. They were only able to convert it for 3 points.
Right.
But you have such a narrow margin for success when you play an upper echelon team like the Kansas City Chiefs, who are not just upper echelon, obviously. It's not like you can look at the Cowboys. Oh, they're good for being in the NFC East. No. The Chiefs are good for being in the NFL. They're one of the favorites to win the Super Bowl for the last couple of years here, as we know. You don't have a large margin for error against this football team. So when you settle for 3 points as many times as the Eagles did settle for 3 points, that ends up shooting you in the foot because you didn't convert those points for the most amount of points you could have gotten on that possession. You had to make them pay for every single mistake. There was one other thing that we didn't touch. Oh, I'm sorry. I mentioned this before the break. Real quick. Gunnar, do you have any further information about Lane Johnson? Obviously, one of the guys that we did not expect to miss today's game did miss today's game. Supposed to be your starting right tackle again. Did not play due to personal reasons that we found out around the 90-minute meeting, the inactives meeting. Any info in that regard, Gunnar?
Now, at this particular time, I put out a lot of feelers and haven't heard anything definitive. And I said earlier today when I was on 97.5's radio show for my pregame show, if Lane Johnson misses a game, it has to be something serious, because this man, I mean, a lot of people don't really know how much pain he played in last year on that bad ankle of his. The pain that he tolerated for a whole season on that ankle, most guys would have gone on the IR, and somehow he pushed his way through the majority of the season. So for him to miss a game for a personal reason, I'm just hoping and praying it's nothing that's been swirling through my mind. I just hope it's something that, okay, it happened at this particular moment and it's over. But I was just shocked. We were all shocked that, you went out there without 4/5 of your starting offensive line. And it's like shades of 2020 all over again when you're bouncing guys in and out, and as I tweeted earlier today, Jack Driscoll was supposed to start at right guard. All of a sudden, he has to move out to right tackle. Nate Herbig has to go to right guard. And Landon Dickerson, who played right guard last week, is shifted over to the left side. That's a lot. When you're talking about building continuity and chemistry, I don't care how much you practice together. Game speed, as we all know, is a lot different. And, and again, I have to give the offensive line kudos, because I thought it was going to be a mess, even against a very porous Kansas City defense. But that offensive line held its own for the most part today.
The makeshift offensive line was a surprising positive for the most part. I was, I guess, reasonably happy to see that they held their own. I like the pace that they kept up that helped Jalen Hurts out a lot. So they definitely did what they could, and hopefully Lane is okay and we see him back there.
I learned a trick from how offensive linemen time it when it comes to snap to throw. Yeah. And I've learned to track a lot of those throws from our old friend Trey Thomas there, Gunnar. And I thought it was abnormally long that Jalen Hurts had to throw a football. He found Kenny Gainwell in the flat. What I liked about it, first and foremost, other than just the offensive line holding their blocks, because they held it for 3.6 seconds, which was amazing. But through those 3.6 seconds, Hurts surveyed the field. Nothing was available when he went through his progression, so he went to the last option, which was Kenny Gainwell in the flat, and he hit him, I believe, for a 13-yard gain. So one, good on Hurts for surveying the field. Two, look at the offensive line, that makeshift offensive line, and I'm sure we'll say that phrase over and over again over the next hour and a half. But they held the block for 3.5 seconds, a little over 3.5 seconds, and then Kenny Gainwell came up with a nice gain for the team on that particular play. So there were a couple of positives you could take away from what the offensive line did in this one. I will say this, though. As much as I like Nick Sirianni's game plan going into the game, I mean, how much motion did we see from this offense going out? How many plays towards the line of scrimmage did we see for easy completions for Jalen Hurts, playing well within your quarterback's range? I thought that was great. But overall, when you talk about that run-to-pass ratio, whenever you have a banged-up offensive line, I still think it's very important to make sure that they're just having quick plays. That's why in this particular instance, I don't harp on the run to pass. Yes, I would have liked to see more than 10 touches from Miles Sanders. He had, I think it was 6 carries in this game. I think he had 4 catches. But when you look at the way they played overall, I look at it and I say a lot of those plays that were allowed around the line of scrimmage allowed the offensive line to have that thud and done type of mentality where they just had to make the block, make it quick, not hold for a long pass play, and make sure they could establish that rhythm and also make sure they could establish that chemistry, having not had these 5 guys all play together at any point. Today was the first time I think the closest was the starter of last year where you still had Driscoll in the game and you still had Herbig in the game when they started the season last year in their opener. But this game was a game you actually allowed, though not running the ball, actually allowed your offensive line to start to establish a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of rhythm, because everything was right around the line of scrimmage. And I thought that was good on Nick Sirianni's part in this game.
You know, something that we haven't really touched on yet, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, is our offense in the red zone. Because Mark, I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
I thought Jalen Hurts played well, but when it came down to it, you know, penalties aside, just play calling, not being able to get a touchdown, settling for field goals twice. Like, who was to blame for that? Is that Nick Sirianni as well?
Well, I'll say this. If Jalen Hurts hits Zach Ertz in the end zone on that first drive, all is right with the world, but he overthrew it. If Zach Ertz catches that ball later in the game in the end zone, all is right with the world. It's a good play. If Greg Ward's able to reel that pass in from Jalen Hurts, all is right. Like, it looked like the play calling was good. The only gripe I really had was the timeout they had to burn. It made no sense to me. I did make a note of it. I just want to make sure I have this down right here. It was right before their first field goal of the game where they settled for, it was 3-0, their first drive. They burned a timeout and took the penalty they didn't take the penalty. They called a timeout before the delay of game, even though they were just kicking a field goal. So there's no difference in 5 yards on a field goal unless you're talking about a 45 to 50 or 50 to 55, right? That particular play, I don't know if it was on Hurts, if he tried calling the timeout late, or if it was on Sirianni getting the call in to call the timeout. He can call the timeout from the sideline. So I'm assuming Hurts looked up, saw the play clock had already, expired, and then tried to call the timeout, and they ended up giving it to him anyway. So that made no sense to me. That's a breakdown of communication, and that I think you look at for Hurts, but it looked like Sirianni was a little bit little upset with himself at that play because they did get him on the sideline during that play.
Well, you know what? A lot of times in situations like that, it's indecisiveness that causes things like that to happen. And again, I'm going to attribute it to a new nucleus, a young nucleus, feeling their way as they go along and learning from situations. And by learning, it's costing them in a lot of ways. But I'm glad that it's happening now because there's still a lot of football to be played. And you look at some of the things that are happening right now around the league, who knows? I mean, the Giants beat the Saints in New Orleans. Washington rallies to win in Atlanta. So there's no giving. The Jets just beat the Titans in overtime. So there's no giving. If I was a betting man, I'd be a poor man right now betting on these games. So you know what? Learn now while it's still young in the season, because you don't know where you're going to be at the halfway point, especially in NFC East, because right now Dallas is clearly the favorite. Dallas basically shredded a very good Carolina defense today. So right now we can say Dallas is the cream of the crop in the NFC East. But because you have additional playoff teams now, who's to say and I know people are going to laugh, But who's to say, depending on what happens here and there, the Eagles can't somehow sneak in a back door? Yes, they have a lot of work to do, a lot of cleaning up to do, mental mistakes, a lot of tightening up to do, defensive mistakes. But who's to say they can't be right there competing? A 9-8, an 8-8 record going, 8-8 record, a 7-8 record going into the last couple of weeks of the season could determine a final playoff spot. And who knows? Because as tough as this Eagles schedule is right now, on paper it's going to get easier. I mean, you still got to play the Giants twice. Mm-hmm. You got to play Washington twice, and both of those teams are not offensive and defensive juggernauts. Washington's been a very big disappointment right now. You know, they found a way to win a game today, but they've been a major disappointment. Okay, and you know they got Detroit still on the schedule. Not saying they're going to walk over Detroit, but they still have Detroit. So there's some games, the winnable games for this team. And so when you make these mistakes now, hopefully you overcome these things down the road. The big problem right now is, what would the offensive line look like between then and now? Mm-hmm. Is it going to still be a passed-up offensive line, people in and out for the next couple of months? Will it ever solidify itself? Will Brandon Brooks ever come back? Will Lane Johnson going to be here? We know Isaac Seumalo's not coming back. When does Jordan Mailata come back to stabilize some of these things up front? That could be huge for this team down the stretch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they get any more injuries, I might be playing O-line for the Eagles. But I appreciate your.
I would pay to see that.
I volunteer. I'll do it. Okay.
There we go. Next one up. I will say this: Lane Johnson, whatever it is, I'm hoping it's something that is not. You know, first off, as a human being, I hope it's not something that lasts a long time. From a football standpoint, if it's a personal issue, usually it's something that's within a week. So hopefully that's all Eagles fans have to concern themselves with right now.
Absolutely.
Sticking with going back to the red zone for a second, this is where, and I started off the show by talking about a lot of plays where you shot yourselves in the foot. You look at the Andre Dillard play, that was in the red zone. It took off a Dallas Goedert touchdown where he was having his head ripped off. And then the other one was another Dallas Goedert touchdown where you had J.J. Arcega-Whiteside who got called for the pick play they tried to call in the end zone. Okay. Terrible call, or did J.J. Arcega-Whiteside just make a terrible block?
He made a terrible block because you cannot extend your arm on a pick play like this. See, that's the problem. It's those little things, just those little things. And you know, the funny thing is sometimes those things don't get caught. You know, offensive linemen hold all the time. As long as you keep your hands inside the pads, a lot of times it's not called. But for whatever reason, the Eagles case, always getting called for holding, offsides, illegal man downfield, and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who's the best blocking receiver that the Eagles have, you know, he forgot somewhere along the line, you cannot extend your arms when you're running that pick play, and he got caught. He got caught with his hand in a cookie jar, and it cost him again. So a 7 turns out to be a 3.
I don't know how they eventually correct these penalties. I mean, you're talking about you're in week 4. I mean, I know Nick Sirianni is a first-time head coach, but I mean, I thought position coaches were supposed to be really good at making sure their particular position doesn't get penalties. And I know offensive line you can look at defensive line because that's where Derek Barnett dwells, unfortunately. But how do you, if you're a team even if you're a rebuilding team, let's go to this whole thing. They're not rebuilding. What are they, retooling? Is that what the Eagles are doing right now? Mm-hmm. Even if you're that, aren't you supposed to be correcting easily avoidable mistakes? Let's just say for a second, you're not going to have a receiver out there get 125 yards every game and a touchdown. They're not going to blow the doors off that way. Your quarterback's not going to throw for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns every week. That's not going to happen. That's not what a retooling team does, or even a rebuilding team, right? This team needs to be correcting those little mistakes so that next year, if they are really building to something, they already have it in their head that they can't continue to make those same mistakes. 4 weeks. We're looking at the same exact stuff. The last 3 weeks, consecutively, the same stuff. Derek Barnett penalties. Andre Dillard, since he's been back in the game, you've been seeing penalties from him. These are all avoidable things. And J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, man, if you're not going to be a threat to catch a ball as a wide receiver, you better do those little things on the football field perfectly. And you didn't see that from him today. Hey, you know what? He had a nice tackle on special teams. Good for him. Other than that, I really didn't see much from him. And, of course, having that penalty where you extend your arms on a play, you didn't have to do it to take another red zone touchdown off the board for this Eagles team. Extremely frustrating. So if you are looking at the disciplinarian, when does that come out of Nick Sirianni? If you are looking for the disciplinarian, when does that come out of Jonathan Gannon? As first-time defensive coordinators and head coaches, this is where they have to earn their stripes. Prove they belong. prove they can coach these guys up to do what they need to do and get rid of those penalties. Sirianni, game plan-wise, kudos to you. The discipline stuff, you got to coach this stuff up, man. You got to coach this up.
Oh, I guarantee you, it's gone over time and time again in film sessions and on the practice field. But when you get to a game, it has to come from the players at that point. The players have to be smart enough to know, especially when you've created as many snafus in a short amount of time as this team has, and you're the most penalized team in the league. It should be a lot easier to clean up certain things. And it's like the same type of penalties over and over. So to me, it's a lack of focus at this particular time. I understand you're trying to make a play, you're trying to get the advantage, but mistakes and penalties, they kill you in so many different areas, especially crucial junctures of a game, crucial times of a game in the fourth quarter. So it has to be the onus has to be on the players, more so than the coaching staff in terms of, okay, where's my head mentally? It's not like I'm playing this game for the first time. I know what I'm supposed to do and what not to do. And so for some reason, these players, not just a player, but these players continue to make the same boneheaded mistakes over and over again.
I'm going to be interested to see tomorrow morning when the snap count comes out, what percentage of plays Derek Barnett actually did play in this game. See if it affected him at all from Monday to Sunday. And then obviously I'm going to look forward next week to see what that snap count is again. Because if you continue to see the penalties, when are you going to see that guy not in the game? Because that's one thing I really want to hold Nick Sirianni to. The one thing he said that made sense was if the penalties continue, they won't play. Just like if you continue to drop a football, you won't play. Just like if you continue to throw a bad ball, you won't play. Not saying that Hurts is in danger of being benched. Not saying that at all. But if you continue to make the same mistake, you won't play. So I'll see if Nick Sirianni continues. I don't know. We'll see if we can hold him accountable for that, what he said during the press conference earlier in the week about penalties with this team. We'll focus on that a little bit later in the show as well. Also, when we come back, we got to hit a break here. When we come back, there is one stat that I saw from one Eagles beat writer that is just horrifying. And it's not the way, I'm sure.
I'm scared.
It's not the way Jonathan Gannon, I think, wanted to start off things as a defensive coordinator. We'll get that to you when we come back. Do want to tell you, though, that our show is exclusively presented by Ocean Casino Resort. Book your next weekend at Ocean Casino and go for the win. More live post-game show when we return.